So, I'm about to show you the 3 most important aha level discoveries that I've had in decades of playing the guitar. I want you to watch closely and watch the entire video because I fully intend to give you one of the best and most meaningful guitar lessons you'll ever have if learning to play lead guitar is important to you. You know, there are guitar lessons that are helpful little tips like angling your pick slightly differently or learning some slightly different pattern to play the pentatonic scale. Tips like that are great and you can get a lot of mileage out of them. But I just spent the last several days racking my brain for 3 concepts from a lifetime of playing guitar that resulted in actual seismic shifts in my musicianship. You know, those massive aha moments that we're lucky to get here and there and that seem to open up the secrets of the universe. And these concepts changed not just my physical ability to get around the fretboard, but they exploded my understanding of how and why music works and what sounds good. Let's dig right in and get started with aha discovery number 1. Grab your guitar and let's get into one of the most important tools for guitarists and their ability to navigate the fretboard. Let's talk about triads. Lessons about triads are everywhere on YouTube and for good reason. Triads are super important for both rhythm and lead guitar playing. Now you might be like me when I was younger. I kind of thought, who needs these stupid little 3-note chords? Let's move on to something more complicated. But the longer I've played, the more I've realized how crucial it is to know your triads. As a matter of fact, I now refer to them as note skeletons because I see them as an underlying structure that makes up a network of the most important notes and ultimately connects the entire fretboard. Triads are a massive help in soloing through chord changes. And they're essential in rhythm guitar playing. Think about David Gilmour playing something like this. Or Mark Knopfler playing something like this. Stay with me here because I'm going to show you how to use triads to make a quantum leap in your guitar playing. Then it's up to you to do the work. We're not going to go off into the theory of building triads here. I've done several deep dive videos and they're out there if you need them. The down and dirty on triads is they're 3-note chords. They're made up of a root, a note 1/3 above the root, and a note 1/3 above that middle note. And the 3rd note of the triad is a 5th above the root. Triads can be major, minor, diminished, or augmented. Today we're going to stick with major and minor for the sake of time. What I really want to get into is how to see and play triads in a way that's going to open up the entire fretboard for you. Here's what I think you've got to learn. For each note and triad type, for instance, C major or C minor, I want you to be able to play a triad starting with your index finger on the root note. On the low E, we've got a C at the 8th fret. We've got this shape using the index finger on the root, root 3rd, 5th. This shape playing the root with the 2nd finger, root, 3rd, 5th. And this shape playing the root with our pinky, root, 3rd, and 5th. Go to the C note at the 15th fret of the A string. The shapes are identical. Check out the shapes with the C at the 15th fret of that A string. Index finger, middle finger on root, pinky on the root. We've got a C at the 10th fret of the D string, and the shapes with the index finger and 2nd finger on the root are the same, but then the shape changes when we have to play the G note on the B string. That's because of the tuning of the B string. With a C on the G string at the 5th fret, we have just these 2 shapes. And with the root on the B string, we've got these 2 shapes. Root, 3rd, 5th, root, 3rd, 5th. We don't have that 3rd shape because we've run out of strings. Now converting each major shape to minor is really easy. Just drop the middle note, the 3rd, from major 3rd to minor 3rd. In the case of the C major triad, we're going to change the E note to E flat. On the low E string, we've got root, major 3rd, 5th, root, there's the minor 3rd, 5th. We'll do that with all 3 shapes. And we can do that anywhere on the fretboard. Now we could talk about triads for the rest of the video. All the triads in a key, triad substitutions, triad inversions. But here is the real revelation I had about triads and lead guitar playing. And that's to take a triad shape like this one with the C at the 13th fret of the B string, E and G at frets 12 and 15 of the high E, and to use it as a template for building licks. For instance, over a C chord, we could just play a C major triad. And that works, but sounds a little boring. What if we add in the F note that sits between the E and G? Well, that sounds a little more interesting. How about the D note that sits between C and E? Well, that sounds good too. How about playing both the D and the F? Well, cool. Now we've got a little scale fragment. Let's mix up the order and add some bends and vibrato. Well, that's a legit guitar lick. Here's the point. Look how quickly we could make up multiple guitar licks just by starting with a triad and then adding a note or two from the scale that triad's in. In this case, C major. And then we could do the same thing with any of the triad shapes that we've learned because they fit together like puzzle pieces on the neck. That's why I said earlier that knowing your triad makes it easy to play through chord changes. Let's take a simple chord progression like C, G, A minor, and F. And I'm going to play through it 3 times. The first time through, I'm going to play just the triad of each chord. The second time through, I'm going to take a triad lick and I'll play the same lick, but I'll adapt it to fit each chord. And then the third time through, I'll play a different triad-based lick over each chord. Check it out. I hope you could hear the evolution there, how we played a simple triad and then turned them into what I call triad-based licks. You know, I can be in different places, anywhere on the neck. I might come up with a different melody or different phrasing, but I'm almost always thinking about triad shapes. Spend time really getting your triads down, and then spend more time building up your inventory of triad-based licks. Your ability to improvise solos on the spot will improve dramatically. Now, even as useful as they are, eventually we're going to have to play something other than triads. And that leads us to aha discovery number 2, how modes really work. Now, there was a time in my life where the mere mention of modes would cause my brain to do a hard shutdown. I was a teenager when I had a teacher first try to teach me the modes of the major scale. But he didn't really teach me. He just asked me to memorize a series of 7 scale patterns without a whole lot of explanation. Then he'd give me a chord progression, say use Lydian over this chord, use Mixolydian over this chord. Again, without much explanation, and it all seemed more like some crazy physics equation than it did music to me. I actually quit lessons not long after that and got by for years using my ear. And I could hear how I would change different scale patterns when I'd play over different chords. But I didn't really know what I was doing, and I also hit a lot of clunkers when I tried to improvise. And then one day, I was hanging out with a buddy, and he put on a new record by Joe Satriani called Flying in a Blue Dream. And I heard this. It's an F sharp and a D being played over a C root. I thought it sounded mysterious and beautiful, and I really wanted to know why that F sharp worked. I still didn't understand, but I started to transcribe some of the solo and magic happened. There's a fast lick in the solo that starts on the F sharp on the low E string, and this isn't the lick, but it's a similar scale pattern. Now, the key of C has no sharps or flats, but I kept playing an F sharp, and it occurred to me, well, the key of G major has one sharp, F sharp, and hey, I actually just played the G major scale here. But over a C chord. Now, I had read that Satriani loves to write songs in the Lydian mode. And the light bulb went off and I thought, holy crap, playing a G major scale over a C chord gives me C Lydian mode. It was like somebody had flipped on a spotlight within my brain. And I could immediately solo over the Flying in a Blue Dream chord progression from one end of the guitar to the other because I knew the major scale. And I realized why my guitar teacher had given me those 7 different scale diagrams with all the funny names those many years ago. If you take the G major scale and play it over any one of the 7 chords in the key of G major, relative to the chord you're playing over, you're playing one of the 7 different modes of the major scale. I now think this way of understanding the modes is kind of primitive, but here are the 7 chords in the key of G major. And the mode you get when you play the G major scale over that chord. G major over G chord, you get G Ionian mode. Over A minor, we get a minor mode called Dorian if we play the G major scale. Over B minor, we get another minor mode called Phrygian. Over C, we get that mysterious Lydian sound. Over D, we get the bluesy or country sounding Mixolydian. Over E minor, we get Aeolian or the natural minor. And lastly, over F sharp minor 7 flat 5, we get the dark sounding Locrian mode, which I also consider to be minor. That was my first level of understanding the modes, and at the time, it was a real revelation. All of a sudden, I could fly around the fretboard and weave in and out of chord changes. But I was still really thinking of the parent scale only, thinking of the G major scale over a C chord rather than really seeing Lydian as its own thing. So I did the work to take my grasp of the modes up to another level by learning each mode from its root. The easiest way, in my opinion, to do this is take a root note like G, and we're going to separate the 7 modes into major and minor. And then we're going to play all of what we call the parallel modes of G by starting with the G major scale and just changing a note or two. Using G major and the notes G, A, B, C, D, E, and F sharp as our starting point, to get G Lydian, we would just sharp the 4th and play C sharp instead of C. Here's the major scale. Here's Lydian. To get G Mixolydian, we're going to flatten the 7th from F sharp to F. Here's G major. Here's G Mixolydian. That's the 3 major modes. How about minor? Well, the G natural minor scale has the notes G, A, B flat, C, D, E flat, and F. Move back to G. To To get G Dorian mode, we're going to make the sixth note, or E flat, into an E natural. That's a great sounding scale. To get G Phrygian mode, we go back to G natural minor, we're going to flatten the second. So then we'd have the notes G, A flat, B flat, C, D, E flat, F, and G. To get the Locrian mode, we go back to G natural minor. We're going to flat the second and the fifth. So Locrian has the notes G, A flat, B flat, C, D flat, E flat, F, and G. So that's all 7 modes, and knowing how to play all 7 from one root note, what we call parallel modes, it truly and completely changed everything about my ability to solo and improvise. Now, I mentioned something in my first 2 aha concepts that is key to both of them. And that's how changing certain intervals changes the sound drastically. Game-changing aha concept number 3 is the power of intervals. To reach your full potential as a player, you have to gain an understanding of how the different notes interact with one another and how different combinations of notes create emotions in the people that hear them. One of the first things you want to get your head around is the idea of chord and non-chord tones. Let's go back to how we were making up licks with triads. For the C major triad, we had the notes C, E, and G, or the 1, the 3, and the 5. And to make up a lick, all we had to do was add in the second, or D. We could even do something as simple as just play the D and hang on it. Notice it creates some tension, that it feels like it needs to move somewhere. And by moving to a chord tone, either C or E, we resolve that tension. And here's the big aha. You have the power to manipulate the emotion in your solos by manipulating tension and resolution. For instance, over a C major chord, let me play all the non-chord tones. Here's D, F, A, and B. And it sounds like to me we're getting more and more untethered from the chord, but then we resolve it with the chord tones C, E, and G. To me, that sounds and feels like coming home. And to get the most out of this concept, you've got to dig in and do the work to get an understanding of how all the intervals and their functions change when the chords change. Take the intro to Jeff Beck's version of 'Cause We've Ended as Lovers. He plays a C bent up to D and then the C note over each chord in the intro. Now the first chord is a C minor. D and C are the 9th and the root. That sound creates a feeling in our brains. Now the next chord is A flat major 7 sharp 11. D is the sharp 4 sharp 11. And C is the major 3rd. That gives us another emotion. The next chord is F minor 7. D and C are the minor 6th and 5th of F. That has its own feel. And lastly, we've got the chord G7 flat 13. D and C are the 5th and 4th of G. Another sound, another emotion. So to get the most out of this concept, you've got to get an understanding of what interval a note is relative to another note like the root of a chord, whether or not it's a chord tone. And then you want to be able to associate an emotion with the sound of that different note over different chords. When you get to that point, your ability to control the emotional content of what you play in your solos is going to go through the roof. But your songwriting ability, your ability to create interesting, compelling melodies is going to explode also. So there you go, people. The three concepts that over the course of decades are the ones that made the biggest impact on my ability to get around the instrument and play things that people seem to enjoy. Now, these things are skills, and they're going to take time, practice, and patience to develop. But here's the good news. I kind of stumbled on these concepts as I now understand them on my own, and it took a long time. I'm laying them out for you now in a way that hopefully will take years off your learning curve. So dig in, work hard, play hard, have a lot of fun with that guitar. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you soon. Bye.